Welcome to our second webinar for the Undergraduate Field Experiences Research Network. My name is Kari O'Connell, and I am the principal investigator of the UFERN project, and I'll be your host for this webinar. So I'm going to give a little bit of introduction and then also talk to you a little bit about the facilitation of the webinar so we all know what we're supposed to do. First, I'd like to mention that this is our second webinar of our network, but it is the first webinar of a new series launching the idea of the ideas and discussion about what a 21st century field education might look like. And so we'll be having a webinar the second Wednesday of each month at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and we hope you'll join us at our next webinar, which will be on December 12th. Just a little bit about the network, the Undergraduate Field Experiences Research Network. The goal is to build a collaborative network that fosters effective undergraduate field experiences by identifying and sharing evidence-based models and practices, identifying, modifying, and sharing assessment tools, looking at how undergraduate field experiences may help broaden the participation and retention of students, and harnessing the power of a network to do research on student learning. And we're super excited about our speakers today because what they're talking about really touches on several of those goals. We will provide a list of ways to get involved in UFERN at the end of the webinar, as well as we are recording this webinar for follow-up if people want to be able to refer to it again at the end. So just a little bit about webinar facilitation before I introduce our speakers. You should be able to type your questions into the Q&A panel. There is a Q&A button on the meeting controls. You can look at either, it should be on the bottom or top bar of Zoom. And if you hover over it, you should be able to see it, and you can type in your questions at any time. And then I will be facilitating the Q&A at the very end of the webinar. And then if you have ideas of resources that you think other participants of the webinar might be interested in, you can use the chat box. And we'll save the chat and share out on our website so people can refer to it if there's resources that people want to share. And again, we will record and put on the webinar on our website as well. Let's see. Oops. So I'm going to stop sharing now and introduce our speakers. We're really pleased to welcome Dr. Diana Delbatten and Dr. Emily Garrity-Ward for our webinar today. So Dr. Delbatten works for the St. Anthony's Falls Lab at University of Minnesota as a Director of Diversity and Broader Impacts. Dr. Garrity-Ward is an associate professor of geology at Rocky Mountain College. And they're going to talk to us today about using place-based, community-inspired research to broaden participation in the geosciences. So thanks for being here, and we're super excited to hear what you have to say. You're up, Diana.
Thank you. And first I want to say thank you to UFERN very much for allowing us this opportunity to talk about our program, which we're very proud of, and to share with you some of our ideas. So I'm going to share my PowerPoint right now. Give me a second here. And let me know if there's any problem with seeing it. There we go. So as Carrie said, I'm from the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory at the University of Minnesota, right on the Mississippi River. And I've got Emily Ward here with me. She's been my longtime assessment and evaluation person for our RU, and she's going to be talking about that later on. But I'd also like to acknowledge two other people, Dr. Anthony Berthola at Salish Kootenai College, who's the co-PI on this project and has been working with me on it for years. And then Niavita Bueno-Watts, who is our current evaluator at Humboldt State University. So this is a picture of the students in my RU, so you can get some idea about the size of the program. In the background there, you see Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is the parking lot of our laboratory, so we're in a very urban setting. but we wanted to make our program friendly to any number of different people. So we have a really unique model that I'd like to share. We have 3 teams, and they're in 3 locations, but we try to be one big community. Our first team, Team SPA, is at Salish Kootenai College. That's in Montana on the Flathead Reservation. And Anthony Berthlat is the instructor there at Salish and runs that team. We have another team we call Team Zagaigan, which means lake in the Ojibwe language. And that's on the Fond du Lac Reservation in northern Minnesota. And it's a collaboration with the University of Minnesota Duluth faculty up there and the reservation itself. And our third team, Team Stream, is at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory in Minneapolis, which is a graduate research laboratory, multidisciplinary, that studies hydrology. And we have civil engineers and mechanical engineers and others, geologists and others there at the laboratory. So a little bit about the RU, and we've been going with this particular RU since 2011, and we've had 121 total participants. It's a Native-focused RU, which means that not all of our participation is by Native American students, but the focus of the program itself is on Native reservations. And we think that this helps to recruit Native students as well as teach others about working on Native lands. And our projects are all community-based participatory research projects. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more, so I won't go into it right now. We are a very diverse RU. We have 75% participation by underrepresented minority groups. 40% of our students are non-traditional students, which means they're either older, have family, part-time, and other things like that. We've had 32% of our participants be Native American students. And all of our students, as I say, they work on teams. None of them have individual research projects, or at least for the most part, we try not to have them placed individually, but have them always with a team. And then there are several ways we make community between our 3 teams. We have a joint orientation now, which this year we just started that in Glacier National Park. We have weekly video conferences, kind of like this here, where we all present about our research, and the students all talk weekly, give an update on their research projects. And then we have an annual all-team gathering for a week at the end of the summer here in Minneapolis, where the students all come together, get to know each other better, show their research, take some field trips, go up to the reservation, and have a poster session at the end and an awards ceremony. So that's our basic structure. I told you I was going to talk a little about community-based participatory research. And this is something that I think is at the heart of our RU. So community-based research is when it's a partnership approach to doing research. So this is from the article you see referenced at the bottom there. And they say it involves community members, researchers, and partner institutions all getting together and talking and developing the research questions from interaction and listening. And all of the partners contribute their expertise on the topic. There's definitely this shared decision-making and ownership of the data, and that has to be carefully worked out in arrangements with the groups that you're working with. And the goal is not only to increase knowledge, which is typical scientific enterprise, but also to improve health or quality of life of your community members. So you're usually focused on a applied question, not just basic research. And this can be done with any kind of communities, but it's particularly apt for Native American communities because of sovereignty issues on Native reservations. It's really important. In fact, I don't really think that it's possible to ethically carry on research on a Native reservation without some aspect of community-based participatory research. And that's because you really do need to get the permission of the tribal group before you do any research. You need to carefully work out issues about data sharing, ownership, usually do an institutional review board process with the tribe. And according to the National Indian Education Association article I referenced here, this is the recommended approach by all of the people you see below, the National Congress of New American Indians, National Science Foundation, American Indian Higher Education Consortium, and so on. So it's really important that you learn more about this, and you can also look up indigenous research protocols. And there are many good books about doing research in collaboration with tribal groups. And that's usually, if you just Google indigenous research protocols, you will find that information. So I'm going to talk a little and give a backstory about how we became involved in this, because I really think the process was important, that we didn't just say we want to be a community-based RU. I had been part of the National Center for Earth Surface Dynamics, which is a science and technology center that ran from 2002 to 2012, and it exists still now in a smaller sort of a form, but that's at NSF, one of their largest kinds of centers, multidisciplinary, multi-institutional, and we had been running the RU on river and coastal restoration. And that RU was really focused on the work of our center. And we had teams in Louisiana and out in Washington, but they were not native focused. I had also at the time been running Gida Kinamanawigmig, which is the K-12 math and science program. And you can see this picture over here, if you can see my pointer, that I had been working on with Holly Pellerin, who's in this picture, and teachers. And we basically have camp every weekend for 6 weekends throughout the school year and then in the summer. And at one of those camps, I had met this woman, Amy Mirbeau, that's in the second picture here. And she had come and done a seminar at my laboratory on lake coring and how it can tell you about the history of a lake. And I thought, wow, that sounds really exciting. I think I should ask her to come up to camp. And when I did, she very happily joined in and came up and brought her coring equipment. She works for the Lacustrine Core Repository at University of Minnesota, and they do lake coring. And so she came up and cored a wild rice lake in northern Minnesota. And this is Mr. Tom that's with her, and they're opening up the core in the classroom for the students to look at. A third program I've been working on at the time is the Geoscience Alliance, which is this little thing down here. And that's building a national alliance for supporting participation of Native Americans in the geosciences. NAMLI is a part of that organization and many others. But at our first meeting to plan our first national conference, this guy, Tony Bertholat down here, showed up, and I got to know him. This was before we'd had our first national conference or anything, and we started working together right away as soon as I got to know him. And this led to a reconfiguration of the RU, but this is Sheldon Misquatis, and he was in the RU on river and coastal restoration. So I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get going. But basically, it's a coming together of all of these diversity programs that we had going at NSED that brought about this community-based research. So this is Dr. Emmy Ito. She's also with LACCOR, the Lacustrine Core Facility at our university. And after that first positive camp experience, we were invited to come up to the Fond du Lac Resource Management Division and talk to them about the possibility of funding the Gada camps into the future with a grant to the National Science Foundation. And we got awarded on opportunities for enhancing diversity in the geosciences award. That was many years ago, and unfortunately that program is still not going up at National Science Foundation, but it really was a wonderful experience for us. The students in our program, who were mostly high school students, and these are some advisors as well, had a chance to go lake coring with, this is Amy, and this is Tom House from our Fond du Lac Reservation Resource Management Division. And they took those cores and brought them into the laboratory and looked at them, prepared slides, looked at them in microscopes for diatoms and phytoliths, and found out about the history of the lake and started doing some research. One of the things that was really important about that experience is that the Resource Management Division was a little disappointed. And I think the reason they were disappointed is not because the kids didn't get a good experience. They actually did very well, and you can read our paper to find out more about that. But they had wanted more solid science research coming out of the program than just high school students were able to deliver in the small amount of camp time that we had. And so they encouraged us to find a way to take those lake core samples and really get them to be more explored scientifically. And so one of the ways we did that was saying, okay, I have this research experience for undergrads on river and coastal restoration. We're going to put a team up in northern Minnesota, and we sort of piloted that. And so we had, for 1 year at the end of that program, we had students looking into these cores. And since then, and so these are some of those students here. And Tony sent Matt Weingart here, who's a graduate student now, to our research experience, and Sheldon again. And Amy started doing research with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources to look into the research that we had started in our camp. So this became an ongoing research project that LACOR became involved in to look at sulfates and sulfate standards in the wild rice, which is an important native food source. And so that developed that partnership with Fond du Lac further, but the partnership had really started with the K-12 program and then with our RU, and then it went on to become a real research project that the students were then able to get more involved in. And I go through all of this history partly because I want you to see the process of working with the reservation doesn't just begin and end with one program, where you don't just go up and propose something, but it really takes this kind of long-term thinking about how you can work together. And so I'm checking my time here. Pretty good. Okay, I got 3 more minutes. So this is Anthony Berthelot, and at this point, which was now 2011, we wrote the research experience for undergrads on sustainable land and water resources. And it was tribally focused, team-centered, and place-based, as I said, but not at first consciously community-based participatory research projects. However, we got going, and our first project with Fond du Lac became an offshoot of the wild rice research we'd already done. This is Nancy Schultz from the reservation and Nate Johnson from up in Duluth. And Nancy told me she wanted to work with Nate, and so that's the project that we worked into the RU, and we've been going ever since then, which is about 6 years now with them. And then we have this team at Salish Kootenai College that's led by Tony Berthelot. And he started working with his resource management division, which is natural for a tribal college to do. And they started working on pollinators, bears, berries, and these were, and also a plant called blue comets. And these were important food sources on the reservation that are stressed by global climate change and other anthropogenic forces. You can see this lower picture here is the woman in the background there is actually this woman up here who's doing the research, and this is her family, her twin kids, and her husband doing their actual field research. And that's one of the things, by putting it on the reservation, we're able to make it parent-friendly and allow people to have their children involved and to research their own place. And that was kind of our basic idea. And then we had a team at the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory, which this is my laboratory right here, and that was never a very community-based project. But when we rewrote the grant for the second 3 years, we decided to go with this theme of community-based research and see if we could get the St. Anthony Falls Laboratory also involved in more community-based research. And in 2017, we had our first community-based project at St. Anthony Falls Lab, which was with Fond du Lac Reservation Island in the Lake Superior called Spirit Island, which is an important spiritual homeland for the Ojibwe people. They had purchased the island and had issues with coastal erosion, and so we were doing a study with our laboratory on that, and the students got involved in it. And then recently, that work with Amy Mirabel has led to a University of Minnesota funded Grand Challenge project on working with tribes to study wild rice in a good way. That involves proper community-based participatory research with memorandums of understanding with the tribes, and we're working with tribes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And this was our first big meeting listening session that we had with tribal resource managers and others last May. And then our students got involved in that research this summer. This is Team Stream the South St. Anthony Falls Lab, and they spent the whole summer working on this Grand Challenge research project, also with another group called MinDrive at our university. But you can see the participation by Native students at our Minnesota team just soared when this was our topic. So switch to Emily. Okay. And go, Emily.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to share my screen here.
I think I have to unshare mine. Hold on. There we go.
Okay. So I'm going to speak about the evaluation of the project. And as Diana mentioned, am I in a presentation view at this point? Okay, great. I was initially on the first 3 years of the project and then has transitioned to Niavita Bueno Watts, who Diana had mentioned as well. So what I'm going to do is focus on some of the data that I have from the initial 3 years, and then talk about collectively what the last 4 or 5 years has been, and some of the data that we get from that. So I'm going to be sharing some of Niavita's data as well. So some of the evaluation questions that were important to the PIs were that, looking at the RU program and its effect on the students' level of skill, knowledge, and awareness of Earth's surface processes, but also specifically sustainable land and water resources. We wanted to know about the RU's effect on student attitude about research and their comfort with research skills. We wanted to see if the RU had any effect on the students' choice for graduate school or career paths, or their interest in doing so. And we were also interested in looking at, does the RU help students who might be coming from 2-year programs transfer into 4-year programs, and specifically into those STEM programs at those institutions. And then, as Diana mentioned, the RU was really focused on recruiting a diversity of participants, and you can see that they were successful in doing that. What I'm going to focus on today is looking at particularly the location of where those RUs were situated and the content of the research, and looking at some of those effects on student motivation in pursuing STEM careers and into graduate school and the like. We also looked at some of the interaction of those students with one another in these teams, and also with their mentors to see how that influenced their motivation. I'm not going to talk about those data today, but really focus on specifically place and the type of research being done. The methods that we used to collect the data from students were pre-post surveys, again, looking at all of those different elements that I just mentioned. And then I did interviews with students. I selected randomly a subset of students to interview at the end of the RU. I also spoke with mentors. I had a post-RU survey for them, and then an informal focus group at the end of the RU to get their feedback on the process. The analysis that we did with these data, we looked at a lot of descriptive statistics, and then did annual comparisons of the quantitative data that we got from the pre-post surveys. And we also did a lot of work with the qualitative data that we got back. So some of the surveys had open-ended questions that the students would respond to, and then also the interview transcripts when I did those interviews with students. We looked at some of the themes that came out of those qualitative data, and both using exploratory thematic content analysis, so seeing what's in those responses initially, and then going back through and looking very specifically at the themes that we picked out. So we were looking at themes of place and community in particular. So as part of the first 3 years of this project, the model of the RU did evolve. Initially in the first year, some of the teams had a collective focus on a particular topic. So Team Z was focused on wild rice, as you heard from Diana's description. Team Stream did a lot of work on stream flow, And the Montana team had different projects that were, you know, somewhat related, but not completely related around a particular topic. And that kind of continued in year 2 as well. Team Z focused on wild rice. Montana team had separate projects. And then in year 3, really started to focus on having a collective theme for their research projects. So that's when Montana decided to focus on the blue camas that Diana had mentioned, and that work continues today. So again, the themes that I mentioned coming out of the evaluation data, there were many that came out of the exploratory phase, but the 3 that I wanted to discuss with you today are place, collaboration, and community. And in particular, talking about the physical place of where these research experiences were happening. So when we look at our data from the student surveys, we asked the participants, you know, did the location of the RU site influence your participation in the summer program? And over half of the respondents said yes. And this is just a pie chart of the first 3 years, okay? 47 respondents here. And we're asking them, okay, if it did influence your participation, why did it influence your participation? And we were actually surprised at some of the themes that we saw come out of that. So when we looked at their responses, you can see that a lot of students listed family responsibilities, and that was a pretty large percentage, 24%. And then another 30% noting that they needed to be close to home. And I want to mention that, you know, we're not going to have these may not actually add up to 100% because students listed many different reasons why, you know, place actually mattered in this. So they also mentioned that the research topics were important to them as well. So if you see the orange research topics and that type of community-inspired work that was being done was important as well. So we were surprised at the influence of actually the geographic locale being so important in getting students to apply to the RU in the first place. So then when we looked at the data, we thought this was, you know, kind of important, and we really wanted to see how this played out in the next few years. And if we look at all of the data that we have for the students, and we have 98 particular students here, and then look at, in particular, the number of Native students that were participating over that time period. We had 41 of the 98 were Native American students, and we look specifically at their responses. We noticed that, again, a high percentage of students are saying that family responsibilities definitely play a role in why the place was important for the RU. Being close to home, again, a large percentage there, and then also noting the unique landscape. So the physical place was important there in terms of its uniqueness, and then the type of research projects that they were conducting were also important. And again, working in Native communities was something that we saw from our Native American students as being important to why they participated in the RUs in those particular places. So when you compare this data to what we saw with non-Native students and their responses, our non-Native students really talked more about the landscape and the geography and the field-based research topics as being primary reasons to why place mattered, and not necessarily about the family responsibilities or being close to home. So we thought that that was significant. So we saw that these responses of the importance of location were different than what we expected, but understandable looking at the demographics of the Native American student population, who were on average slightly older and made up the majority of the participants with children. So there were, you can see here, the number of students that were parents in the program, and 22 of the 26 were Native American students. And then you can also see that, you know, on average, the age was slightly higher. So what we see is that these data suggest that the physical proximity of the RU indeed helped facilitate Native student participation by allowing these participants to meet their family obligations while also gaining research experience. The research topics were locally relevant was also important, and it really drew in the participants because they're aware that their research findings would directly impact their home communities in which the research was conducted. So as the project evolved, student feedback helped the leaders appreciate how important place was, community was, and family was in conducting this work. And in the interviews, we find out from students that, it was difficult to balance sometimes those family responsibilities and also the responsibilities of the RU, but that this particular RU made accommodations for them, and they would have been able to participate. And in other RUs that may not have been making those accommodations, they just wouldn't have been able to participate. So they really saw that as a benefit of this particular RU experience. So to kind of summarize here, this RU model does do a nice job of meeting the needs of students coming from a range of backgrounds. And so I think the biggest thing that this project has done was to really tailor the RU to the needs of the student population that they have applying for the RU itself. Some other just take homes that we recognize is that it's important to have the students be financially secure. So we noted that they have families, they're older, they may have jobs that they left to do this or at least put on hold to do this research. And so they having a paycheck right away it released that stress in terms of finances. Communication was really important, and Diana's done a great job at embedding multiple ways that students can interact with each other and with their mentors using this team model. The model's been really good at valuing and incorporating traditional knowledge and cultural information and encouraging students to share that information. So students that have that experience and that knowledge already feel ownership of the project because they're able to provide knowledge that other people don't have as part of that team. And again, emphasizing teamwork over individual success has been seen as a positive experience for students in this REU. All right, I'll give it back to Diana there.
Okay, thanks. So I think Emily talked about creating an inclusive REU that makes it possible for students to participate. And let me see if I can get this there. So my question is, when you plan and deliver your REU or your other field experience, do you recognize that the road goes both ways between you and the student? Or are you building in barriers for their participation without even realizing it? So are you always requiring the student to come to you metaphorically and physically, as opposed to meeting them somewhere halfway along the road? And I think that's a good question for an REU. And okay. So I'm going to talk about designing an inclusive REU just very briefly. So on recruiting, are you finding the students that you're looking for in the places where you're looking? Are you looking in the right places? And connecting with minority professional organizations is one great way to do that. Connecting with mentors at these organizations is another way. And finding out also that are the institutions where you're trying to recruit students who are, say, geoscientists, do they actually have geoscientists? And are any of those students actually minority students? Would help you figure that out. So understanding the institutions you're recruiting from is really important. And then building alliances. And I'm going to talk about the Geoscience Alliance a little bit more in a minute, but that will make that job easier for you. And then make sure your recruiting materials are delivering the right message. Make sure that they're communicating to your students the message that you want to deliver, that they're welcome in your program, and not scaring students off with the language that you're using. Like, for example, if you're saying we want students who are high quality, well, you need to be sure that your language isn't scaring students off. Let's just put it that way. And then, have you read your application materials? Do you read them and read them with a group or get feedback from other people on them to make sure that they're asking the kind of questions that you really need to know, that allow the students to tell you about themselves, that allow them to do it whether or not they can get online easily. And Then I think the big question is a personal essay. A lot of people have you write a personal essay, and also for graduate school. And we try to break that down into short answer questions so that we can allow the students to tell us about themselves without having to write some big scary page about themselves. And then there's the selection process. And I'm saying, do all your semifinalists look the same on paper? Who's making the decision about what to accept about the students? What criteria are you using? Are you giving students a chance to let you know why they should take you beyond their GPA and their minority status or whatever? So I think it's really important to kind of look at all those parts as you're going into your program and asking yourself, are we being inclusive? And then when they actually come to your site, again, Emily mentioned the importance of having that first check when the students arrive, to recognize that many students are traveling for the first time ever, and they may need to have their hand held a little bit to get to where they're going with all that airfare and bags and all of that. And you need to make sure they have good information about that. Make sure that you can allow students with families to participate. Be open to have students bring their children to meetings, help them with daycare, lodging, whatever you need to do. And then ask yourself, do they have to come to your community, or can you go to their community? Can your mentors travel to where the students are, as opposed to always having the students come to you? Make sure you have good orientation activities that stress ethics, team building, community-based research, whatever it is that are the big themes. Make sure you allow the students the chance to give their opinions about these things, as well as just talking at them. I think it's really important to find out where the students are coming from. So you got to give a post-acceptance survey or interview. Once they feel comfortable that they're already in the program, let them tell you about any issues that they may have, so that you know what they are coming in and you can help them to resolve them. A lot of times you'd be surprised at all the amazing and weird issues that students come with. And then make sure that your mentors are well trained and know how to resolve conflicts, and be there yourself to step in and find a process by which your students can come to you if they're not having a good time with their mentor for whatever reason. And then in the evaluation, are you asking students questions that matter not just to yourself but to them, and allowing them to really give their opinion? And then once again, what are your criteria for success? If it's just graduate school, then it may not be that you're designing the program to meet the needs of the most students, okay? I'm moving a little quick because I see we only have a couple minutes left. I wanted to tell you about the Geoscience Alliance, which is our national alliance for broadening participation of Native Americans in the geosciences. We started this about 8 years ago, and we've had 4 national conferences. Well, we've had 3, and the 4th one's coming up this year in January in Phoenix. So if you know students, mentors, or others who would be interested in participating, or if you'd be interested in coming yourself, check us out. We have a website that I didn't put on here, but it's geosciencealliance.wordpress.com. And you can just Google Geoscience Alliance and you will find out more about us. But, oh, here's our website. So it'll be in Phoenix, January 31 to February 3rd. And it's focused on undergrads, grad students, faculty, K-12 students, and others, informal educators. Anybody who, you don't have to be a geoscientist and you don't have to be Native to attend, but you just have to care about our big goal of broadening participation of Native Americans in the geosciences. And I think this organization has been responsible a lot for a lot of the success that we've had. I meet students, I meet people who mentor students. Networking gets easier. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I really think that having this alliance has totally helped grow my REU and give it a strong reputation in the community. And you don't need to start your own Geoscience Alliance, but be sure that you're building a program that meets the needs of your target. Be active in your recruiting, network a lot to build these long-standing relationships with mentors and students, and help to build the pool of students who are coming in rather than competing for a limited number of students, and build a strong reputation for your program that you care about diversity. Thanks, and thank you to our tribal partners, and a big, big thank you to NSF, and especially Lena Patino at NSF, who has supported us for many years. Thank you.
Hey, Diana, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, you know what? I think what you were just talking about was amazing. And for everyone, I'm sorry everyone has to hear this, but we were not able to see your slides. Do you have slides of that? And
I do.
We have a few more minutes, so I think everyone would love to see them. So let's
try again.
Yeah, let's try again. And this is the funky thing that I know everyone is aware of about doing a webinar. We're in like 3 different places, and thank you for your patience. There we go.
So I'm just going to run through them really quick. So this is where I talk about making sure the road goes both ways. Designing an inclusive research experience for undergrads. Can y'all see these now? Yes? Okay. Some more advice. And I believe Carrie said this will be available up online.
Yes. Yes.
Here's some pictures for our Geoscience Alliance. This was from the first conference, I believe. No, second, possibly. Well, it doesn't really matter. But here's information about the Geoscience Alliance and our website. And then just some ideas about networking for diversity. Our tribal partners here, Salish Kootenai College and the tribe, Fond du Lac Resource Management and UMD, our laboratory at the University of Minnesota, and NSF. Okay? Did we lose Carrie now?
No. I don't want to turn my... You did not lose me. I was just having trouble with my mute and unmute button. Thank you both very much. I know everyone can't clap, but we're clapping. We really appreciate it. And sorry about the whole slide thing, but we'll definitely share those for people to look at. And now comes the part where we have quite a bit of time, close to 15 minutes for Q&A. And so I'm just going to give everyone, we have one question so far, but we want to give everyone a few minutes to type in the Q&A button. It should be along the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says participants and Q&A. And I will be reading these out to Emily and Diana for them to reply to. So our first question is from Janet Branshaw. She's at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and she asks, what kinds of experience and or expertise did your program leaders and mentors need in order to meet the students where they are? Did you select for specific leaders and mentors, or did you provide interested leaders and mentors with the professional development they need to be successful in this program?
I think it's been both ways. We have a lot of tribal people involved, both at Salish Kootenai College and also up at Fond du Lac. So I work with the mentor myself, Holly Pellerin, who's an elder at Fond du Lac, and she actually gives a lot of advice and training to the mentors that have worked with us. But every year we tend to have new faculty and new students, and I work with them individually to talk to them about the students and what I've seen and what I think works. And then the students themselves, I think, support each other a lot being on the teams. And we encourage them to speak out a lot and tell us what's happening with them. So kind of a mix, I would say.
Thank you. So we'll do our next question, which is from Damon Gannon. And the question is, Diana, how did you form the alliance? Was it created intentionally or was it more organic?
It was created intentionally, and my director, Chris Paola, who's a great geoscientist at our lab, told me to start one. And he said, you need a national group, Diana, to get your job done. And I was really intimidated by the idea, but I started with sessions at national professional conferences like AGU, GSA, ACES, the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, just having sessions saying, would you like to start a group like this? And when we felt like we had a core group of people who were interested, we wrote a NSF conference grant for our first conference. And my Science and Technology Center was generous to put in money for a planning meeting. And we did that at the ACES conference, American Indian Science and Engineering Society conference, in 2010 in Portland, Oregon. We had a pre-meeting before the actual meeting and just invited people to come. ACES was good at sending out that invitation, and we had about 30 people there that helped us talk about what the organization should be, what it should do, and what we should do at our conference. And then from that, we planned our first conference. Since then, we have run the conferences whenever we can get funding. And in between times, we run a listserv and a website and just informally have gotten to know each other. And so I've made friends, I think, all over the country that work on these issues. Emily's one. And Emily, how did you learn about it?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually learned about it through a colleague. So someone that had been working with Diana and had, word of mouth essentially told me, hey, they're having this conference and you should definitely go because of your research interests. And so I did.
So if anybody else wants to join, you're hearing about it right now, go to our website and you're welcome to come. We have travel scholarships for people who can't afford to be there. We prioritize Native students, of course, but you can also just register and come and pay a small registration fee if you can afford to pay your own travel. So please come to Phoenix. What can we say?
And we'll make sure we put that link up, I guess, just so people know exactly how to follow up with that. Or if either of you could put it in the chat right now, that would be awesome too.
Okay, and the theme is going to be bringing ancestral knowledge to the present day to meet the challenges of the present day. So it should be a really fascinating conference. Yeah. Great.
Okay, so we have a few more questions. Chung Cheng, he's actually at Oregon State, so he's asking a question. He says, thanks, Diana and Emily. With multiple cohorts located at different locations, how is day-to-day and week-to-week supervision handled?
We have a lead team member at each of the sites. At UMD is Nate Johnson from University of Minnesota Duluth, and he's working directly with Nancy Schultz from the reservation. And they plan the experience up north. Tony Berthelot is involved with the team out in Montana, and he takes care of all aspects of that, from who will be the mentors to what the projects will be. And then I work with the Minnesota team to arrange their research experience with faculty from there. I'm not a scientist myself, so I don't do any of the science mentoring, but I do have all of the students write a paper every week to me, a couple of pages long, about their goals and their successes and frustrations, so that I can stay keyed into what the students are doing on a weekly basis and talk to the mentors as needed. We also have a weekly video conference, like I said, where the students can, each team presents their research to one another, so they get to know each other. The orientation is a great place where they first meet, and then the all-team gathering where they get back together again. We've been pretty successful at that. We have our frustrations, of course, but, yeah.
Thank you. So another question we have is from Nia Morales, and she says, you mentioned the project didn't start off as decidedly participatory research, but would you have done anything differently if you had started off with that perspective?
Yes, and I think a lot of that came out of the evaluation that we received, that we were doing community-based research, but the students weren't understanding that. And so as we came further along, we started training the students in that, getting speakers to come in and talk about Indigenous research protocols, making it really obvious that these were projects that were planned with the reservation, and talking about that process. So I think that's been a big thing. And then, I don't know, Emily, can you think of anything we would have done different? It's kind of weird asking your evaluator, but I think that's the big thing. Yeah. Em? You're muted. That's okay. And then the other thing,
okay, I think I'm on now.
okay.
I'm sorry, it's a little delayed. I think you're absolutely right, Diana, because even in that early 3 years of responses that we were getting from students, some people were definitely recognizing that the research content had this community focus, but not everybody was. And we saw that was important, particularly with some of the students coming from, diverse backgrounds. And so we said, hey, why don't we leverage that as a way to, encourage more recruitment from these communities? And I think that it was definitely coming from the data.
I also think that St. Anthony Falls Lab is a graduate research laboratory, so I don't really control what projects we do there, but I think that just hammering on the idea that this is what we're doing got our faculty more interested and has built that idea into our laboratory a little bit. I don't know how you could do that. It just happened for us, and it's been very good that our university has become more community-based over the years. So.
Thank you. I'm going to do one quick follow-up from an earlier question, and then move on to Jan Hodder's question. Chung asks, so do you have 3 program coordinators? This was in reference to the question he asked about weekly supervision at the different locations. And he just says, do you have 3 program coordinators, 1 for each location, and are they supported on the RU grant?
We do have 3 program coordinators. Our coordinator from Salish is supported on the grant because tribal college faculty do not receive summer salary. Our University of Minnesota Duluth faculty member is not supported on the grant. The reservation did not ask for any budget and has consistently said they don't need any, but we do support a graduate student to work with that team up there that's written into our grant. And in the Twin Cities, I'm pretty much in charge. I am the program director in the Twin Cities. I hope that clarifies.
He can, I guess, let us know if it doesn't. So Jan Hodder has a question, and she says, what sort of follow-up do you do with the students after the REU program is over?
So I've maintained contact with almost all of my students. I stalk them on Facebook. I start suggesting that they become my state Facebook friend or LinkedIn. I contact every student yearly that I've had since 2002. And I still have, I would say, probably 70% of them that write back and tell me what they're doing. I love to see them on Facebook because then I get to see their children and their future lives. And that's really exciting. And then we also follow up at professional meetings and conferences. So most of them do a conference presentation, and usually I'm at one of the conferences that the students go to. So I've seen like 7 of my students already this summer at conferences this fall.
Thank you. So I actually have a question, and because I'm a panelist, I can't type it in. So for all the others, to everyone to see, but I'll just ask it. And that is, you talked about in some of your end slides, Diana, about ways to have an inclusive program. And one when you talked about was, thinking about how you deliver your message for recruiting and the selection process and not scaring people off. And that's something that we're actually interested in working on as a network, is with all these group of people who are doing this kind of work, can we start looking at recruiting and selection processes to do research to think about how we can make them more inclusive? So I have a question. Do you know of any research or work specifically done on that? Or were you kind of using your partners and thinking to help you think through that, like how to not scare students off, how to be welcoming in your recruiting and selection?
So when I started thinking about it, I went and looked at a lot of REUs and their applications just to kind of see what things I thought would scare students off. I don't know of any specific research on that, but I do advise very much having minority serving institutions and 2-year colleges or whatever if your target is tribal colleges or community colleges, then I think that you should definitely have mentors from those colleges look over your application and make sure that they think that their students would not have trouble with it. But I have been wondering about uncompleted applications. Every year you always have some. And sometimes I wonder if some of the questions that we ask don't still. I mean, it's a hard question, right? And I think that's a good thing that we could do collectively is try to figure out what might scare off a student, you know?
Thank you. So we have just a couple minutes left, but I'd love to first say another big thank you to you both, Diana and Emily. And I'm going to actually do a quick screen share about a list of ways to potentially get involved in UFERN, and then just remind everyone that we'll have a recording of this up on our website, and we may also highlight a few of those, I think, key slides in your talk, like the ones that we're talking about, the inclusivity elements. I think a lot of people will be interested in that, so we might just kind of post that up also on its own. So I'm going to do one more quick screen share on my end, and then we'll wrap up. So this is just kind of to end our webinar today, are ways that the larger community can get involved in UFERN. The biggest is to hear, as we're developing this program, we're only in the beginning of our second year, is to sign up on our listserv to get future announcements. Definitely come to our the rest of our webinars if you're interested in those topics. Our next one is December 12th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. And these are just some other ways to get involved. We'll be at the ESA meeting in 2019. Let us know if you'll be there. We'd love to talk to you there. Please share your favorite resources for assessing student learning with us. We're starting to make a collection of that. And then we'll be working on an interactive Find a Collaborator database. Those are just a few of the ways to get involved.
Thank you.
So thank you, everyone. And to Diane and Emily, I think we'll have to actually end this, and then I'll follow up with you in just a minute after the webinar. We turn it all off.
Thank you again.
Thank you. Clapping from everybody. Thank you all to the attendees for coming.